Physical game sales are down 35%, according to Video Game Chronicle's Andy Robinson. Now, this is versus 2023 sales, but it did spark a whole bunch of conversations in my head that I brought Josh Brown in on, because there's various things I want to touch on as to how much the industry has changed, likely from the one that you and me and us all grew up with. And the things that we're moving into are, increased subscription pricing models, digital consumption, changes in trends in the industry, costs of games, the average types of games that get released, and the sales figures that go alongside them. Another thing that comes out of this report is that subscription services are up 12% year on year. But GamesIndustry.biz's Chris Dring weighed in, saying that any game on something like Xbox Game Pass costs the studio 80% of its revenue. Dring said, look at how low Hellblade 2 charted, or where Indiana Jones came, or even Starfield. Game Pass clearly hurt sales of those titles on Xbox. He also mentioned that any buzz around a game coming to Game Pass actually boosts sales of the competition, and in particular PlayStation 5. Alongside this, I wanted to throw in that ex-PlayStation boss Jim Ryan once remarked that the subscription model is unsustainable given the $100 million budgets that go alongside various games. Now, there's a lot to get to overall. There are so many points I want to talk about, but initial thoughts on this whole, can digital pricing models succeed? Is the future in subscription pricing and things like that?
I did not agree with much with Jim Ryan during his tenure, but I do think I agree with his idea that a subscription exclusive based model can't work for games in the same way that it does for movies and TV, and even then it's not very proved, and a lot of those streamers will lose a whole lot of money trying to make those platforms work. But yeah, I think the digital future, that has definitely been coming for a while. I mean, Xbox themselves called it in 2013. They were just way too ahead of the curve with their projections, I suppose. As someone who owns a PlayStation 5 Pro and is desperately trying to find a disc drive for it.
Got him physical Christmas games for Chris, can't play them.
I can't play it. Tekken 8, can't play it. Dead Rising, can't play it. This is guttering news because it does seem like the trend, as I said, is going way towards digital games. The majority of game sales have been on digital anyway for the past couple of years, but to see such a stark decrease in buying physical, that is a little bit of a surprise because it seems to be happening on a way more rapid scale now than I thought it was.
Let's talk about pro physical stuff. I just want this to be one overall conversation. Obviously, let us know what you think. Down in the comments below, do you buy digital more than physical? I think the average person does buy more digital stuff. However, we are seeing a bit of an impact as to the bottom lines of certain titles when there isn't a physical release available. Like what happened with Alan Wake 2. Game initially came out in 2022, I believe.
2023.
Yeah, because it's 2025 now. Horrifying. But Alan Wake 2, even as of last November, has not made a profit despite finally getting a physical version at the end of last year. However, fans reported after buying the physical edition that they still had to do sizable downloads to be able to get the most of the base game and the DLC. It was meant to be the complete edition. It wasn't on disc. You still had to download stuff. But still, Alan Wake 2 didn't land as big as it possibly could because there wasn't a physical edition available at launch. Alongside that, you've got Capcom's magnificent Kunitsugami Path of the Goddess, which Capcom said at the end of the year last year that it failed to meet sales expectations. Now, that didn't have a physical edition at all. So that conversation on, we're moving away from physical entirely, there are still some casualties of that. But it's kind of just up in the air as to how big of a deal physical stuff is when a lot of the data still points to so many games that are digital only also doing well. Like, I mentioned Alan Wake 2 and Kunitsugami, but you do have things like Baldur's Gate 3, Power World, FIFA overall. Some of them have physical editions, but they do most of their sales digitally and do extremely well. Again, I want to get to some more stuff in regards to what's happening with physical in the modern day, but thoughts on the wrinkles I'm adding?
There's a lot of wrinkles there. They're making me so old. I look like Guy Pearce and Prometheus, Scott Tilford.
I am the substance.
What the hell did he even say? I can't remember. He just said something about all of those wrinkles. Yeah, it's a conflicting one. I think to me it highlights the idea that in the modern industry, the ceiling and the floor for games are just so drastically different now. A game can come out and sell 20 million copies out of nowhere, have an incredibly long tail, do big business and microtransactions, or you can have something like Alan Wake 2 that comes out and nobody wants to buy it and it just flies completely under the radar and it doesn't even hit, 2 million sales. It doesn't even recoup its budget like you mentioned. I think that would have happened even regardless of the physical sale drop because while of course Alan Wake 2 might have had a little bit of a bump. And would it have been enough to save it? Maybe, but then you also have to take into account those distribution costs as well. So how much would have that added onto the back end, and how much would have that would they have needed to recoup from that? I don't know. This kind of pivot to digital, though, I do think if you look at like those games you mentioned, Baldur's Gate 3, Power World, you know, those games dropping on PC or on Xbox Game Pass or whatever and getting so many players, I do think that the most played games are often those online ones anyway. So GTA Online, for instance, yes, you can get that as part of GTA 5 like so many people have, but you don't need GTA 5. You can just buy the online component on a digital store and go nuts. Call of Duty, obviously that sells a huge amount of box copies every year, even if it is just a percentage of the overall digital spend by players. But something like Warzone, that's free. That is digital download only. Fortnite or whatever it is, you know, all of these online games that exist and get big player bases without a physical copy kind of at all. So I can see why the numbers tell these publishers not to prioritize physical releases, but at the same time, we also live in an industry and we also enjoy an industry that likes to just take these games offline or unlist them, which I think in my eyes makes physical releases actually, ironically, more valuable than ever, because you don't have that, as we've talked about so many times, that sense of preservation or sense of history when it comes to maintaining games that can just get lost to time if you don't buy them secondhand or find them by other means.
That whole side of the industry, because I was going to talk about the wider philosophical feeling around physical. It feels like we're losing something if physical sales go away. I don't know how much of that is a age-specific thing, a generation-specific thing. Like we, for the most part, grew up with physical releases. Like, you know, YouTube Analytics says that you're probably in your 30s. And chances are that you grew up having some of your favorite games in your hands. And it, like I said, it feels like, are we losing something moving away from that going forward? Also, it would seem that most of the console manufacturers would like to get away from that stuff. But I would say more for money grubby reasons, like, you know, the idea of the PlayStation 5 Pro and then Sony under-producing the disc drives. If they can lock you to a digital storefront, then they can just charge you whatever you want. And that whole captive audience pricing mentality is something that, you know, you're better off buying physical to offset that. But the increasing monopoly that the likes of Sony have on the market means they can do that. And also going forward, the next Xbox system, if the leaks are correct, is just a big tower that doesn't have a disk drive in it at all. So it's another one of those things of an all digital future. Is that what people want? The conversation's been going that way for like 10 years now. But you can look at some of the casualties, like I mentioned before, of when a physical isn't available. Is it just a case of knowing it's out there that still provides the sales or the conversation that leads to the sales? And when something's digital only, you know, you're either incredibly huge like Roblox or Fortnite or Minecraft or whatever, although they did eventually get physical versions, or you just fall off entirely.
I think you made a good point there, and one that I hadn't thought about before, but that idea of, yes, we know people are buying more digital, myself included. I thought I would be physical forever, and I still buy physical here and there, but eventually I gave in and just thought, well, actually, I get a better experience if I buy it digitally, at least in the short term. And I wonder whether that kind of decision to jump from physical to digital is a natural thing, or if it is informed by the way that publishers and developers and console makers even kind of treat what physical is. Because if you think about what you get if you buy a PS5 copy of, I don't know, Spider-Man 2, let's say. Yeah, you get the disc, you get that joy of owning it, but it's as bare bones as you can possibly get, right? You don't get a nice little insert, you just get the box, you just get the disc, and 9 times out of 10, you're gonna have to download something anyway on top of that, right?
Some cases are just codes now as well.
Like some cases are just codes, some cases don't have a disc, some do, but it's just a partial part of the game, then you have to download like another 50 gigabytes on top of it. And I think if you compare that to buying Blu-rays, which again, are also probably in decline right now, but if you at least get like a 4K Blu-ray or a Criterion collection or one of these boutique collector's items, you're getting like a nice package out of it. You're probably getting a better version than you can stream as well, just due to the bit rate, just due to the inherent nature of streaming. that is not the same situation with games, because you're getting the same version that is on the disc, but you're getting like those drawbacks. You're maybe having to install those patches. You're having to get up every single time you want to play it to put the disc in. It's not as immediate as buying digitally. And I wonder, by making them so bare bones, have they kind of been encouraging us to go in this direction? And I do think that has culminated in the PS5 Pro, a Pro system, which should be definitive, just selling the disc drive as an extra, positioning it in the minds of like fans and players like us as something that in the modern world isn't needed and you can get by without, putting them, like you said, on the storefront where they take a bigger cut of the revenue anyway, because they don't have to pay for the third-party distribution of the stores or whatever, and they get to dictate the price, like you said. And you don't get many better deals buying on the PlayStation storefront than you would do secondhand. It's like the same price, if not more expensive sometimes.
That's a whole other thing. One, to that point, they're saying that if you're a professional consumer of this stuff, the Pro version of this is the all digital one, the fastest one you can get. Don't worry about the physical stuff. However, the knock-on effect from that is another part of a beloved part of me growing up with video games was trade-ins, which is another consumer-friendly thing that a completely monopolized industry doesn't want. If you can finish a game, take it back in, trade it in, get something else, that benefits you far more than it benefits them, especially if you're doing a direct, receipt transaction where you're just keeping a hold of the receipt. Let me swap this for another fully priced game. There's only one unit sale there. It doesn't benefit them. So over time, like Josh said, the general mentality seemed to be, push you towards digital transactions over time, and removing the trade-ins are just not a thing anymore. In the UK, it was Game Station, it was Game. Game is still going, but they are tanking. The reality of Game is that they're plugged into Sports Direct right now. You can go to like a little bench in the back of a Sports Direct and maybe talk to someone there. And even loads of them got shut down last year.
Do they stock new games anymore? Wasn't there a headline where they don't actually stock the new stuff? I just remember seeing a lot of mutuals online having trouble when they pre-ordered, I think it was Silent Hill 2.
Yes.
And they were just like left in the cold. So like, what benefit is there in pre-ordering a game from a physical store when you're not even guaranteed to get it on the day the game comes out?
There was a whole thing last year where, certain outlets, certain chains, certain parts of Game were shut down, and yes, they had problems fulfilling their orders. And there was an insider report, I forget who by, sadly, maybe Eurogamer, on how the amount of units that these stores were being given. It was literally like 1 or 2 or 5 units for X number of people who had pre-ordered, and it just wasn't enough, so they had to cancel them, which is another death knell to the physical stuff. It's a great segue though to the likes of limited run games. The idea that a third-party company can come in and go to those studios, the bigger studios, and say, look, we'll offset all the physical costs, we'll do a physical run of titles, and we'll not do it at launch, we'll wait a little bit. Right now, the most recent one is the Soul Reaver Collector's Edition, which is obviously in line with the Soul Reaver remasters from the end of last year. But in a bigger sense, they did the Sonic Shadow Collector's Edition with that game that came out earlier last year. But still, that is a changing of the guard. Like the idea that the formerly associated with the official rollout Collector's Editions are now with someone like a Limited Run or an I Am 8-Bit or Fangamer or whatever it is. All these companies that sort of step in and go, we know the industry's not going to do this, so we will offset this. Limited Run, it was either last year or the year before, did their first, or one of their first, pop-up stores where you can go in person and actually buy these things off the shelf for extortionate prices. And I love me some Limited Run to a point, but oh my God, their prices are crazy. But again, captive market. If the industry's not going to do this, there's no competition, the likes of someone like Limited Run can run away with it. But I think that's interesting, that if you want a physical game, you're actually better off waiting a little bit. If you want something that's more fan-made, like you said about getting a deluxe package or something, that's what a Limited Run or whatever will give you, but you need to wait for them to put it together in a more bespoke sense.
Well, that's it. I mean, I actually held out for Baldur's Gate 3, that game's collector's edition, and because I need my serotonin and my dopamine right now, it was either like wait till it comes to our territory. I think it was out in Asian territories at the time. Either wait or just buy the game digitally and buy the standard version. And eventually I ended up doing that. And yeah, I'm a bit gutted that I don't own that game with all of its glorious physical stuff, but it meant that I got to play it like 6, 7, 8 months prior to when I would have got it anyway. Same with Alan Wake 2, a game that I was almost certain I was going to buy physically when it came out. And then when they announced the collector's edition, it was pretty good, but you can't, it's tough to justify it when you've already spent 70 quid on the digital edition of a game. Like you have to buy it again or whatever it is. But I think that idea of those boutique sort of third-party sellers, I actually don't mind that if they're done well. I think it's maybe the future overall, because to me, I think, like I said before, if you're buying physical now, you need a reason to buy physical beyond just it being a preference. I want to see those kind of extras that are bundled with it for reasonable prices, hopefully. Or even stuff like, I know we bang on about it, director's commentary, some behind the scenes stuff. If you can package that into the physical sale exclusively or whatever it is, I think that makes them way more viable and way more, and just be different to buying something on the storefront. You know, it gives them a little USP, a unique selling point that the digital version might not have. Like, that's kind of, again, the same reason why I often buy movies on physical, because yeah, you can get those special editions on, you know, if you buy the version on Amazon or something, but do I want to have Goodfellas tied to my Amazon account forever, or do I want to own it? So if the world ends, at least it'll be me and Joe Pesci's beloved face.
That's the whole the weird irony of it, is that we would buy physical because you can keep it forever. It works. It only works as long as backwards compatibility works, so there's a disk slot to put the thing in. But the idea is that when you buy physical, you can keep it longer. The digital side of things is that it is, like you said, forever tied to your account. Like, the refund policies for these storefronts are largely terrible. Like, if you download something on PlayStation and play it for even 5 minutes, you've invalidated your refund. You'd have to request a refund before you even start the game, which obviously doesn't work if the game is broken or whatever. So there's still a lot of ground to cover there. Like I said, there's a lot of consumer rights stuff that is tangled up in this, where we get a worse deal as consumers versus the way the industry was in the past, where you could go back and trade it in, get something else. I do want to end on a positive, because I feel like the one of the biggest sort of conversations that comes out of this is this the norm? Is this the new norm? You know, to me, progress is retrospect. It's only until things get set that we look back and go, okay, that's stuck. NFTs didn't stick around, even though they were a big talking point for a while. And the conversation here is like, are digital sales going to be the future? This is a massive drop off in regards to physical versus digital. However, is that just because 2024 wasn't a big landmark year for AAA releases versus 2025, where you've got everything from potentially GTA 6 to Mafia the Old Country, maybe Borderlands 4. There's a lot of stuff about to drop, and will that turn the tide? They'll all have physical releases, so in theory, everything should rising tide and come back up again.
That's something I think that can't be overlooked as well. You know, we talk about games like Alan Wake 2, we talk about games like Knitsugami, right? But those games, as much as I love them, would they have sold if they were distributed widely, if they had hundreds of millions of dollars behind them? They would have probably sold more, but would they have sold like Fortnite levels? I don't think so necessarily, and nor should they really. Of course, they would have a bigger push, but I do think it's important to also note that games like that, they of course get a better chance, but there's still no guarantee for something like Knitsugami, which I would say has a more niche audience.
Oh yeah,
overall,
totally.
To like properly take off. Of course, there are exceptions. Power World came out of nowhere. Even Baldur's Gate 3 really didn't have that big level of hype behind it, and then went on to sell all of those copies. So it definitely gives them a chance, but I would just say, I suppose, there's no guarantee anyway, and it does still rely a lot on word of mouth or the quality of the game overall and the appeal of the game overall. I don't know, maybe I'm souring your positive note here, Scott. I don't know.
Well, my thing is that a thriving industry, or the industry I grew up with, goddammit, should be able to support the big AAAs and the small titles. You should be able to have, you know, your God of Wars, your Elden Rings, or whatever, right alongside the Kunitsugamis or the smaller titles, the indies, the mouthwashings, whatever it is. All that stuff should be able to come out, set realistic sales expectations, have a realistic amount of money allocated to advertising or whatever it is, and get those things over the finish line. I think we're still figuring that stuff out. I still feel like the industry is quite skewed after the pandemic. There was a lot of inflated expectations based on how many people were playing back then versus everybody who, you know, didn't then stick around, kind of thing, when they got back to work or got back to their lives, or etc. So it is just an ongoing conversation, but it is interesting pairing it with 2025's release slate and being like, is that the thing that's going to save physical sales, or, you know, is that going to mete out subscription models where, like we said at the very beginning, even on the movie TV side, the Netflixes, the Disney Pluses, they're all way down as well. Yeah. There's a general mentality that subscription models ain't it. And so that itself is another wider conversation. Like, it does go on and on, but I just think right now we're at a bit of a nexus of various factors here, and a lot of it's just going to come down to a general consensus between those of us consuming this stuff as to what sticks going forward.
We could talk and will talk for an extra hour about this probably on a podcast at some point, because I feel like there's so much left to be said, Scott.
Is that the What Culture Gaming podcast?
That is the What
Culture Gaming podcast.
Just subscribe,
Please do.